we have James Hayter. James is the director of an award-winning design studio called Oxigen here in Adelaide. Established in 1996, he has been working as a sole practitioner in collaboration with clients and urban designers on projects such as the Nsley development and the Playford Civic Centre and many, many more. You can find them on his website. I don't have it here, but if you go to his website, there are many, many projects there you can have a look at. His focus on improving the health and productivity of our cities is echoed in his practice approach and mirrors a global movement in new landscape architecture that will positively change the way our cities are planned and inhabited. James, please take the stage.
I'm going to talk about regenerative landscapes. To me, as a landscape architect, regeneration is about what we do. All our landscapes are about using what's on site. Landscape architects start from the site itself in every case. The most important things we deal with are water, soils, plants, and through that we always design for the place. Adelaide's a particular place, that's why particularly things like water are so important. So I'm just going to go through just some of the projects that we've been lucky enough to work on in through that, and I hope from that we'll have a discussion. The first project I want to talk about is in Windsor Street in Unley. Windsor Street started off as this little nothing project for us. It was just a restore a verge. So those that know it, it runs parallel to Duthie Street in Unley, landlocked area. You can see not much open space there. This is the first sketch we did of it. It said that at the present time, on the left-hand side, you will see what was there. It was a bit of mulch with some decaying moribund elm trees, English elm trees, that ended their useful life. We did a sketch. It was not about doing a straight line, but it was about doing a wiggle. And that was literally the first sketch we did of this job to have a look at it. That's what Windsor Street looked like. So on the left, you'll see the moribund elm trees, Ulmus procera. And on the right, that's what it looked like. Underneath it, there's a big stormwater culvert that carries water through Unley. It was not possible to take the lid off this culvert. It's quite a narrow corridor. It would, of course, flooding. So in this case, it had to go under. This is what it looked like. Really not a very useful space. You can see from this, or maybe from that one, everybody put their fences up and turned their back on this really ugly space. So Windsor Street is a development. It's an 8-metre wide verge, goes along the suburban street, a number of blocks. So you can see that it's quite long. It's about 2 kilometres in length overall. These are the detailed design planting plans we did for it. And it was really set up over this 8-metre wide verge of saying that we'll put a footpath there. So rather than put a footpath up against the curb, the other side verge was really narrow. We said we'll just put a footpath there and we'll mimic the creek underneath. So there was a creek underneath, had a culvert in it, and we'll put a footpath on top. So these are slides of it just after it was being built. Sorry, Melissa, we did use in situ concrete in it through that. A lot of natural materials. So we actually took down all the elm trees, mulched them and put the mulch back on the gardens in that. This is it as it's gradually growing through that. So this is this organic path that mimics a creek bed underneath. All the materials like the timber, the cut down logs, the stone where we could find it on site were all collected from there. We collected water on site and kept it as much as possible. So these are little frog ponds that were collecting water that came off the pathway. As the ponds developed, frogs came from, we don't know where, but there were native frogs everywhere that collected in there. So it became an education and a great thing for kids in through that. We used signage and we made interpretation of the natural system that was occurring there. This is as the native vegetation is gradually growing up. Sections of boardwalk where we did have the frog ponds and little ponds which went underneath it. and a transformation from these English elms, really sterile urban environment, into this little bit of biodiversity in the middle of Unley. And through that, this is as the plants are growing. This is only after 3 years, so using local native indigenous species being planted there. We were planting on top of a culvert, so there's not all that much soil there, but these plants were growing up. This is one of the crossings, so the original identification marks marking the streets still there. But this, if you compare this to what it was before, just in terms of the vegetation growing up, as I said, interpretation of the local flora and a lot of fauna. What we found is that this is not just a spot for biodiversity, but people actually went to it. So people use it now as a linear park in that. And then people love going through the vegetation. This path slows you down because it's got this sort of crinkle in it. It's not a go from here to there. And on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, you see people out walking their dogs or taking their children for a walk or just using it as a playground, an urban playground. The list was worked up very much with the council, and the Adelaide Council has a fantastic little group of dedicated asset managers who just love native plants. And the plants, we did research into what was there previously, prepared these lists, and then it was planted up with trees, shrubs and ground covers. We also did a program of conservation of native plants, so some of the ones which are rare and endangered, we managed to put back into it. And now Windsor Street's become a seed bank for other plantings in Adelaide, and some of those rare plants have come on. So we've created this incredibly sort of diverse and interesting project. So our role as landscape architects was as a facilitator. It's like all these projects, you work with community, you work with the asset managers, the depot staff, the horticulturalists. It was a whole lot of people working together, and the benefits from that in terms of creating shared ownership and in a place that meant something for a lot of people was really important to its success. Certainly not about any one group or individual sitting behind drawing boards at computers coming up with these ideas. It is very much a social event, and as I show you the other projects I want to talk about, I think that's a common theme in it. The second project I want to show you is one which we've been working on for the last 2 years or 3 years, which is a kitchen garden at the Adelaide Botanic Gardens. And again, this is about a regenerative landscape, one that's about education and showing people, particularly kids, just simple things like, where does a carrot come from? Now, everyone in this room, because we're all old except for a couple of us, laugh at that, but people don't know how a cabbage grows. So if I ask you, how does a peanut grow, you'll probably get that one. But do you know how a peanut grows? Yeah, well done. But how does a pistachio grow? That's getting a bit harder. And through that. And look, you can go through them, and a whole lot I don't know how it grows. So what's happening is, because you go to Woolworths, you take your kids to Woolworths, I mean, we don't know where our food comes from, and we're dislocating ourselves as a society from growing it. And I know Melissa's right into this because she's creating water and allowing us to grow it in gardens. So that's what the kitchen garden's about. This was the site. As you can see, that was designed by a landscape architect, not us, but it's very open, blank, very aesthetic in through that. So this was the site of the Botanic Gardens. On the other side of it, to the north, shading the space, was this with this line of exotic palm trees in through that. Very sterile, nothing grows under them. Again, like the English elms, the wrong species, not great. Again, this was our sketch, and the way we work, like all landscape architects, is that we work through a series of spaces in through that. We work out spaces and then the functions that are going to occur in those spaces. That's a sketch that was worked up a little bit more for a stage one of this garden. In through that, so it's lawns and planted beds. And I suppose that's a bit easier to read. That's the Goodman building behind where the Botanic Gardens are. The wetlands, which are fantastic, are behind and to the right of us and through that. And then this was this garden that replaced that sterile lawn. It was also a really contaminated site because there's the old tram barns underneath it. There was a lot of rubbish under that, and the garden tended to have to be built up rather than go down. Again, it's about collaboration. It's about working in it, and design. All design's a social event, which is why we like it as a profession. These are two ladies from the Spinners and Weavers who helped us design a shelter. So this is a model we made of this shelter, which is part of the garden. That's it just after it had been built and through that, and the weavers built it for us. So we provided the materials, provided the frame for it, and then a group of it over a period of weeks came and built this as a structure. That's just part of it. It's actually a really beautiful structure that lets this fantastic light inside the structure. This is the garden in action. So it's built, the structure's on the right. Things like the grow shed is on the left. It's a fenced garden, but because you get the school kids there, but rather than being, a palisade fence or a picket fence, it's one that had public art in it. Through that, that's the grow shed. It's really just scaffolding, and then the scaffolding has a series of shelves which have grow trays in it, so that the kids go in there, they see what does a capsicum look like after it's put in and seed, how does it grow. This is part of the garden as it's coming on. All these plants are productive. They're all edible vegetables that you would expect. In the background you can see some water tanks, so we collected water, and again it's a demonstration of how you can use water on site for your gardens. That's the weavers, the grow shed, and down below it's just part of the gardens. And through that, just the fence again. The fence was quite quirky. It was a local fabricator down in Theberton, just built that one, just a really quite fun. Just experimenting with different ideas for people who haven't got big gardens, and things like these plastic sort of triangles where you can grow vegetables, in this case strawberries coming out of it. Compost bins on the left, so it was on the right. We had a little time doing dragonflies and worms on top of it. And then underneath, part of the grow shed of growing the different species. And then that was stage one. We're building stage two now, and there's a stage three after that. So these are raised vegetable plots, and this is as much for the kids as for elderly people, and a demonstration at the gardens how in small areas with good soil, just managing water, you can have this fantastic garden which is about regeneration. Now, our next project might challenge a bit, just in terms of wondering of relevance, but in a sense it is really relevant. And this is just a master plan we worked on with some architects called Woods Baggart down at the River Torrens corridor. So it extends from Bowden, where we are now, into Hackney Road. Now, the basis of this and why the regeneration comes in is that any landscape is built up of a series of layers. So if we look at the Torrens, there's the original Aboriginal settlement of it. There was a Grand Victorian era, and that's Plaintree Drive behind the Botanic Gardens. Then there was a suburban area where they ripped all that out and put lawn and exotic trees like poplars in there and willows in there. And then we're at a different era now, and what does that era look like? So if you look at this as major investment, and there are so many billions of dollars, I can't comprehend it, that's been spent on that, but probably around $12 billion of investment down in that area. It's a huge economic driver for South Australia. Disparate responsibilities about who looks after this area. Our role was to come up with a long-term vision of how to regenerate this landscape and to bring it together. We did that by a series of photo montages and images about ideas. So the top left, you'll see a nice 50-metre pool to the west side of Morfett Street Bridge. And then you can see other ideas, including wetlands in Benithan Park, which is the bottom left. What's happened is that it brings it together. And I guess my point in showing you this is that it is about being strategic, bringing together a whole lot of initiatives and plan it. This is, again, is not the work of one person, it's the work of a lot of people, all tiers of government and the community, and it's really an important project in terms of how we might look at our city. The next one I want to talk about is, very quickly, is Tonsley. You know where Tonsley is, at the Darlington on the South Road. It's mooted as Australia's first innovation district, which brings together a lot of different functions. Again, it's about the layers that were there. So we all think of Tonsley as the old Mitsubishi or the Chrysler site. Before that, it was the site of agricultural innovation. So apricots were first bred, hybridised in Tonsley on that site. The nectarine first came from that site. So the stump plough was experimented with on that site. So there's this fantastic history of the Raglas family that was there, that was on this site before the car factory. Huge site, 11 hectares of roof. We've kept 8 hectares of that roof. That was done again through a lot of community consultation. Through that, we had an open day and had 2,500 people come along to the open day. A lot of those people were former Mitsubishi workers who wanted to know what was going to happen to that site. This is about shared knowledge. It's about frameworks, design approaches, technical inputs, and what that is about is economic sustainability. This is the master plan, the vision. Quite sort of simple in terms of a road layout, a building layout, which kept 8 hectares of the roof, and then an open space network. Won't go through this, but this is just showing you that it's a process which is organised and is quite sort of logical. This is 2 years' work for us to produce this stuff and what comes out of it, but it's important in setting up the project for the next 20 years. It's the first project in Australia, commercial project, to get 6 green stars, which is just fantastic for South Australia that they can do it as a project. Some of the innovations were to persuade Sapin to take on standard LED lights as street lighting under their standard tariff, which might not sound a lot but is huge for councils, and through that. Introduce things like scruffy domes, which take the place of a thing called a plantation sump in rain gardens. So we have rain gardens through that. It's also linked to Oaklands Park through a pipeline which goes about a kilometre and a half, 2 kilometres, that links this site to the wetlands in Oaklands Park. And you'll just love this photo, which is all about our lights. We're very proud of our lights. Which are LED lights, and the journalist in The Australian took this fantastic photo, which I love. So it's about original manufacturing, innovation and construction. Big input from public artists. So these seats were done by the artist Grey Hawk from big logs of trees which had to be cut down on site for a road to go through, old sugar gums, 100 years old. We didn't throw them away, we used them to create benches, or graded benches, and these are urban forests which we inserted into that 8 hectare roof, which has got solar panels on top and is enough to power a suburb. Just next project's interstate, and again it's about regeneration. So this is on Lake Burley Griffin. It's a project which was an old power station that powered Canberra. And through that, these are the early photo montages we drew of it. This is the built project in through that. And again, it does what Tonsley did and the Riverbank did. It reuses materials on site. It picks up an industrial ethic that came from that old use of it as an industrial site. 2008, 2016, overlooks the Jerrabomba Wetlands, international wetlands, and through that, fantastic site. All the principles really of Tonsley we developed earlier in this project, which we're still working on and have been working on for about 7 years. To look at the Facebook and Instagram shows you what the young people particularly think of this project, which is just fantastic. Now, just finally, I just want to talk a little bit about our workplace. This is our office, because again, what this displays, I think, is a lot of what regeneration is about. So it's about what's South Australia, what can be reused, how can you create places that do things like put roof decks, so roof deck in through that. What we did is we put ledges in front of our building so that we engage the office with the street so people can sit there. One of the fantastic things we had one day is a lady's car broke down outside. She had a little baby, so she put her baby on the cushions and she sat there, and we gave her a coffee and she waited to the RAA and came and rescued her. Now that's what architecture's about, that's what landscape's about, that's what community's about. But we're not designing necessarily buildings in an urban form which allows that kind of interaction, but it's so important to do it. So our practice is about dialogue, so that's how we've set it up. Detail in it, things like using copper, because copper comes from South Australia, or did. It's got it interesting. And just finally, we're doing another building for ourselves just up the road in 84 Halifax Street. And what we've done is that, again, this is all about South Australia. So we've used Montero slate on it, we've used South Australian timbers from the Adelaide Hills, cut down there. Everything we've done is South Australian, it's local, and that's about regeneration. Just to give you one example is that we want to do steel windows. Nobody in South Australia makes steel windows, so even the government architect in office in Lee Street imported their window manufacturer from Sydney. We said, no, don't do that. So we worked with a fabricator down in Lonsdale. He's now making, he made the steel windows for it, and he'll be after now not only supply South Australia, but export that outside of South Australia. So it's capacity building in terms of local industry and encouraging that local industry to develop, which is about employment, economics, but it's also about regeneration. So just finally, the lessons that I suppose that we learn from what we do in terms of regeneration of these landscapes are: one, strategise. It's really important. Talk, strategise, collaborate. It's not about you, it's about other people and working with communities always. Export your knowledge, don't just keep it here, you can do that. And finally, innovate. Innovation is what all our industries are about, and it's what creates sustainability in the long run. Thanks very much.